It's showtime, folks. Enjoy the show.
And a fine Saturday morning to the two of you.
Good morning, Mr. Nelson. How are you?
I'm good. I am good.
Saturday morning, and I don't feel rested. I feel like I could go right to bed now.
Oh.
That's right. I know. Just woke up, ready for bed already. How are you two? What's going on? Anything exciting in your movie lives?
Let's see. Movie lives.
Wow.
No. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Is there such a thing right now?
Yeah, it's a busy time of year, so I'm relegated to TV stuff I can do. And so we're finally, because we didn't have HBO for a while with the HBO Max, so we're, finishing off Game of Thrones. And last night was the last episode of season 7, and a lot of our friends are like, just stop there. Just stop there. Don't go any farther. Just stop there. You're fine. And I'm like, I know, but I know what I'm in for. So I know it's going to be rough, and I will,
sure.
I will make my way through that. Yes.
You should take note, like where you think it should go, how it should end. Like make your own headcanon before you go in and watch it. And then at the end, just like come back here on the show, and then like we'll compare notes, like where you thought it was going to end up versus where it ended up.
I'm curious if George R.R. Martin actually has any idea where he ever wanted it to end, because I'd love to know one day.
That would be nice. And we're getting to news that basically we now have a spinoff. So basically, there's going to be a new Game of Thrones television series coming here in the next couple of months. They're actually filming
because they had one. Because I saw an article that said, oh, here's some of the footage from the pilot that they started shooting for the first thing that they were going to do, like Naomi Watts or something, and then that got canned, and now they've got the second one that they're doing, because I think the one they're doing now is
House of the Dragon, right?
Right. Is it after
House of the Dragon, which is
is it a prequel?
No, it's a prequel. It's a prequel,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's about Daenerys' ancestors.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not sure how far back, though. I haven't done that much research into it. Once you finish Game of Thrones, I highly recommend reading Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, The Making of Game of Thrones. It's a warts and all story about like how they went from inception all the way to finishing it off. And you don't know the size of that show until you read that book, and you really get to see how massive an operation it really was by the time they got to that last season.
Just a crazy amount of work and people and locations, like filming everywhere. And just so you know, it is 300 years before the events.
300 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's not her parents.
It's like
sort
a
of
couple
like
generations.
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's like one of the many spin-offs that are in development, because there's that. They're also talking about Tales of Dunk and Egg, 10,000 Ships, 9 Voyages, Flea Bottom, and then an animated series.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was big business for HBO, so they're trying to spin it into a franchise.
You got to do what you can, I guess.
Yeah. Can't blame them for that.
Those poor HBO people have so much to compete with nowadays.
There
was a time they were the big thing, right?
Yeah.
Right?
So we're doing that, and then we sort of dipped our toe into, what is it, Shadow and Bone, the Netflix one?
Oh,
it's based on the book series.
That's on my list to get to as well. How is that so far?
Don't start if you're me. Don't start watching an episode at 9:30, because it is an awesome world. There's the first couple. There's a lot of dialogue and things like that, and so at like 10:15, it's like, oh wait, what did I miss? So, at the beginning, because there's so many characters in the world and it's setting things up, and I can see all the pieces. They've got to establish those things, but it's a very cool world, interesting characters, diverse type of world and everything. So it looks like it's going to be really, really cool.
Have either of you read the books that it's based on?
No.
Yeah.
No, picked it up though. Picked up the book, so it's on my reading list after I get through the Goldfinch, which we just recorded the episode on Trailer Rewind for. And neither Tommy nor JJ or I had read the book, and so I thought, maybe Pulitzer Prize winning novel. Maybe I should.
It's got to be better than the movie. I don't know. I didn't see the movie, and I haven't heard your show, but I'm curious. I'm very curious what everybody thinks about that one.
It's interesting.
With Shadow and Bone, I had a similar experience with His Dark Materials, and that the same kind of thing. The first couple episodes are so dense with what's going on that after about the third episode, I was like, I am not in a headspace for this now. So I just sort of put it aside. So I want to get back to it because it was really good, but it was like so much info dump to catch up on what's going on in the world that I just couldn't process it at the time.
Well, speaking of large worlds and sort of prequel series, this was announced, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago or whatever, in the John Wick universe, a TV show about the Continental. Well, there's more information about this because it's actually going to be not contemporaneous with the John Wick movies. It's going to go back to explore the history of the hotel back in the 70s. So we'll spend a little bit of time with Ian McShane's character, Winston, and his history with that. So I think that's always fun. I mean, it does eliminate some of that sort of dramatic tension of like, what's going to happen to this character? We're like, well, we know Winston's not going to die because clearly he's going to have to make it for the movies. But I'm intrigued to get a little bit more backstory, because for me, it's maybe not necessarily about the character of Winston, but the world that he's going to inhabit, what goes on in the Continental, all of those things. So it's, I think, a great approach to doing something within that universe, because that's one of the things that stood out for me is John Wick gives us, his story, but it did such a great job of world building. Like, who are all these other characters? They're really intriguing. What are their stories? What is going on in this world that, John, extricated himself from? So to go back into that in the series, I'm looking forward to this. Hopefully, coming to fruition, being on the screen, we can spend some time back in that world.
It was interesting to hear how they went about it too, because they had sort of had that idea and then kind of had a bake-off. So they had a bunch of writers pitching what that show should be. So they didn't come into it having, here's what the show should be. They went, hey, we wanted to think about the Continental. What do you got? And they all sort of pitched their own thing. And so the one who won essentially had an idea of 3 90-minute specials that would then go back in the 70s and tell about how they're there. And so that was the one that they went with. So it's interesting, not only that was the idea that won, but also that format.
Yes. Yeah.
That's I mean, like, it's really embracing the sort of weird nebulous world of streaming now, where you can make the show as long as you want and have it released whenever you want, because who knows what works anymore.
Well, that's, that sort of approach reminded me of the BBC series Sherlock, because it's like, episode 1, I'm like, no, that's a 90-minute episode. It's basically you're getting a movie per episode, and it gives you that expansive time to tell some stories. And the fact that it's then a series, you can tell a much larger story. You get time to really delve into characters and weave some complex character arcs and plots. So yes, I love that, because try to wrap things up in 40 to 60 minutes. Sometimes it can feel a little rushed.
I'm curious about it. I don't know if I'm excited yet, but it's piqued my curiosity. I guess that's...
I know. Yeah. You've got quibbles. You'll have your quibbles.
Me and my quibbles. There's always a few.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't stop me from being ridiculously overpraising for things at the same time, even when I have quibbles. So maybe I'll love it.
Yes, your quibbles replicate like tribbles sometimes, I have to say.
Yeah.
Andy's triple quibbles.
Exactly. Well, okay, so let's see. We got that potential thing going on, and then Marvel, of course, dropped this new. It's kind of I don't know. It felt like a praise of Marvel. Like, look at all the great stuff we've been doing, and it's really fun. It's a very enjoyable, emotional watch. I love checking it out, and then all of a sudden we really start getting into, like, at about the halfway point, all of the new release dates. I mean, it kicks off with Black Widow, of course, and then Shang-Chi, the Eternals, and then it just kind of keeps snowballing, and we go into 2023. It's crazy. Kyle, you've got all the dates in front of you, don't you?
I do. Yeah, it was a really good trailer, because there's been a couple of these that have come out recently. The Fast and Furious one that came out was really good too, because it was Vin Diesel, not really in character, talking about the power of the movies, and that seems really cheeseball, but like, it really got to me. Like, I was like, oh yeah, like, you really feel like the power of the movies and how much I've missed that going into the theater and doing it. And now with this one, Marvel, they are celebrating themselves, but it also starts out with Stan Lee talking about coming together and community, and like the guy on your right is your brother and the woman on your left is your sister, and like, it's about coming together. And I was like, yeah, Stan, it is about coming together. And then they start hitting us with the info. So little couple clips of Black Widow, of course, but we've had already a trailer for that. Same thing with Shang-Chi, we had a trailer for that too. And then the very first footage of Eternals, which we have seen nothing about. And so we got to see Angelina Jolie. It's like it still boggles my mind sometimes when these people show up and you go, oh, they're part of the MCU now. Like, I mean, Kumail Nanjiani is in the MCU, and it's like, oh, right, of course, yeah. So we got to see just a little clip of Eternals, and so I've already seen people trying to deep dive of like the 30 seconds of footage that are in there. And then that was the last of the new footage. After that, it was just a series of title cards. So Spider-Man No Way Home coming out December 17th, 2021. And then Doctor Strange now in March 25th of 2022. Thor Love and Thunder, actually, as of date, that's their big one for May of 2022. And then we actually had some official title changes. So the big ones were, it's not Black Panther 2, it's Black Panther Wakanda Forever. And that comes out July 8th, 2022. And we don't know what that story is yet, but it's interesting that they're not calling it, not putting a number on it. They're calling it Wakanda Forever, which makes us think that it'll be more about Wakanda and less about the Black Panther himself. And then the Marvels. The Marvels was really confusing to me because I'm like, who the heck are the Marvels? It wasn't until the synopsis came out that it was, oh, that's Captain Marvel, Ms. Marvel, who's going to have her own series we'll have already seen by the time that comes out, and Monica Rambeau from WandaVision. Like, the three of them are together, and they are the Marvels. And it was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense. That comes out in November of 2022. Then Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is in February of 2023, and we finally have the movie that's been on this list for the longest actually has a release date now. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 comes out May 5th, 2023. It'll be James Gunn's swan song with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because that is his last film for them, and he's switching over to DC. So when we were talking before we started, there is a Christmas special. The Christmas special will be coming out beforehand, but it's a totally different thing. It is an hour-long special that's sort of like the Star Wars holiday special, starring live action, starring all the Guardians, but it's its own standalone.
I just don't know
for Disney Plus
about holiday specials. I don't know
either, but I like the fact that James Gunn tweeted a picture of the front page of the script, and Mark Hamill commented, "I have a bad feeling about this."
Yes. Oh yeah.
Oh boy, holiday specials.
And then just closing out the Marvel chapter, because I know some people are annoyed at hearing all the Marvel stuff. Wednesdays are the new Fridays. Loki will be being released on Wednesdays instead of Fridays now, so we're going to get a couple days early. I don't know exactly why. I'm trying to think from the business perspective. So they get the +5. I don't know. They can crow about their numbers a little bit more because they got 2 more days to add them on, but Disney doesn't release numbers, so
either that or they're trying to get people in the habit
either way, I'm happy.
Be at home on Wednesdays, be out in the theaters for the theatrical releases on Fridays.
Oh, there you go. I like that.
That probably makes the most sense of all of it.
Yeah, because when we talk about this on the Marvel Movement Live, Shang-Chi, at the end of that trailer, it says only in theaters.
Right.
So the Premier Access thing is only for Black Widow. So after that, they're not planning on doing that again.
Interesting.
For Marvel movies.
Yeah, so that's going to be the thing, is like, how quickly will theaters be able to kind of shift things back into gear to kind of get things open for people.
Yes. That's right. We need to get Alamo Drafthouse out of Chapter 11. We need to do what we can to save our theaters.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of theaters, let's talk about some trailers that are going to be, maybe some of these will be playing in theaters. Yes. I know one of them won't be, Kyle. But so for the trailers, I got mine in there first, so I'm going to go first. I picked an interesting story that, it was one of those trailers that I watched. I'm like, this looks like it could be really interesting. It also looks like it could end up being really bad. I was like, what is happening with this? And then I come to find out that, it's a film called Georgetown, and it's directed by C. Waltz. As it turns out, it's Christoph Waltz, and he's starring in the film. And I'm like, okay, so is he just doing that because he didn't want his name like all over the thing and was trying to kind of make it look less like it was his big project or something, or what? Like, I'm very curious about this.
You ever heard of someone called Ulrich Mott? Weren't you wearing an eye patch the last time we met? An eye patch? I don't think so, no.
When may I see you again?
You are aware that I'm married.
You let me know if anything changes. Please raise your glasses as I marry the bedazzling Mrs. Elsa Britt. Can we speak?
No, not on the telephone. That's not prudent.
Who are you talking to?
Shut your face!
There will be time for tears and remembrance.
No, there's urgent work to be done.
What work?
I must find and bring to justice the men who killed your mother and my wife.
Why did you leave the house on the night of your wife's death?
For a walk.
You're late. Do you remember your feelings when you learned that your mother was planning to marry Mott?
Shock, horror, disbelief.
He looks like he could be my brother. Try to get to know him before you condemn him.
She left him $250,000.
A few months ago, she disinherited him.
Am I under arrest?
Not at the present time.
My mother gave him money, propped up his so-called career. In exchange, he cooked her meals. They gave her an excuse to keep having Georgetown parties. It was a marriage of mutual exploitation.
You are the perfect butler. Is that all you want to be?
You know it isn't.
So what are you waiting for?
Urgent from Ulrich Mott, Villa Zarathustra, Sadr City, Iraq.
Who authorized the embed of a German national with the Mahdi army?
Nobody. Diplomacy is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask for directions.
The more I find out about this guy, the less I understand.
Every word he says is a lie.
You stink of alcohol.
And you reek of the grave.
To Ulrich and his marvelous achievement.
It's based on a true story called The Worst Marriage in Georgetown. It was actually an article in the New York Times magazine. And he plays this guy who's this social climber, I guess you'd say, in the Georgetown area. And he falls for this woman, Vanessa Redgrave, this older woman, and they get married. And Annette Bening is her daughter, and she's very curious, like, why is she marrying this guy? And it turns out that he's kind of marrying her because he wants to get into all of these like political, social things and be kind of somebody. And then you find out that there's actually, an ulterior, it seems like an ulterior motive that Vanessa Redgrave's character has for marrying him as well. And so I was like, okay, so there's some interesting twists in here. It could actually be a pretty twisty film. It could be kind of fun. And then I was like, oh, Christoph Waltz is directing it under C. Waltz instead of using his name. And it's a 5.9 so far on IMDb. I'm like, my hopes are diminishing, but I can't help but be curious about this one. What did you two think?
I was thinking the same thing because I was like, C. Waltz. I'm like, IMDb, what do you tell me? Okay, yes, that's what I suspected. It's not a coincidence. It feels very much like, yes, this is his passion project. Looking at what I see in the trailer, I mean, a great cast. I think this is an actor's, vehicle of get these people together with a script that's going to be about these performances. There's nothing that, from the way the trailer's cut together, nothing that was really compelling for me to see this story. I'm more interested in maybe reading the article. That may, pique some interest in what this story is about because it's, okay, what's the draw? And for me, it's this cast. And maybe that's why that's my perception of this trailer. But I'm like, he's directing a film. He's playing the central character. There's something that he's wanting to bring to the screen in terms of what he feels he can bring to this performance. And just looking at the way I thought, okay, Vanessa Redgrave, that character's interesting. I can see the draw, but I don't know together if it's going to make it as, wow, this is a great film and a great story. I think it'll have great performances, and that's what my expectations are at this point.
When I first watched it, I was super excited because I'm like, Christoph Waltz finally got a lead role.
Yes.
Like, he's been such the supporting actor for everything. And I was like, oh, it's so great. Oh, because he cast himself. Like, okay. Well, I think he can still handle it, but still. Yeah, I had the same kind of reaction. I watched it, and I'm like, what is the story exactly? Like, it's there's so many twists and turns and going around, and not in like a mystery thriller kind of way, but in a like really sprawling, like we're not exactly sure where the focus is supposed to be kind of way. I don't know. It seemed to me that this was the mid 2000s. This would have been an HBO original movie.
Exactly.
Probably, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like is it like in like Recount and like it sort of fits in that sort of thing. Danny Strong would have written the screenplay. You know, like that kind of is the feel to it. I don't know if it's going to be enough of a story to carry an entire big movie, but we'll see. I mean, like I say, like Andy was saying, it does look interesting.
Yeah.
Whether interesting means good or not, we don't know.
Right,
but
that's the question. Well, I guess we'll find out soon because it's going to have a limited theatrical release starting next week. And then on May 18th, it goes to video on demand. So one way or another, we'll be able to check it out right quick. So there you go. All right. Next up, Steve.
Yes, I got my trailer in second, and you won't see this on the big screen because it's a Netflix special, right? Or Netflix original, I should say. And this is... It reminded me of a film from the late 90s. What was that with Kyle MacLachlan? The Trigger Effect, right? I don't know if either of you guys saw that movie, right? Where it's
such a great movie.
Where it's basically the power goes out and society in this sort of more rural town crumbles because it's like the power's out and he's got to go to the pharmacy to get his daughter's medication, but the power's out and it's a fight breaks out and it's like looting and it's like without, electricity, we disintegrate as a civilization. So watching this trailer, I thought, I see elements of that here. It's a little bit of a twist though that happens a little bit further into the trailer because this is called Awake and there's a devastating global event that wipes out all electronics. So like, okay, we see that there's a car crash and the police officer's like, there's the power's out, even in cars. So I thought, okay, this is, let's remove advanced technology from people. What happens? But then they add another factor, which is now people have lost the ability to sleep. And so in the trailer, we get sort of a little breakdown of the phases of sleep deprivation and what that does to people. And so now we've got a ticking clock of we've got to figure out a way to survive to solve this. Otherwise, humanity is doomed. But then we find out that our one of our main characters here, a little girl, somehow is able to sleep.
Why don't you get some sleep?
I'm not tired. Look at all the shooting stars.
Those are satellites, Noah.
I don't know what the hell happened. Power's out everywhere. Cars, too.
"15 hours ago, something happened. We don't know what caused it or why it occurred. But what we do know is that none of us can sleep."
After 48 hours of no sleep, there's a loss of critical thinking. It's gonna be total chaos.
Get in.
But what about after 5 or 6 days? We're all gonna die if we don't solve this.
Let's go right now! I'm trying!
Hands up! Get out! Don't shoot!
Hands up!
Don't shoot!
Hands up!
I can sleep. I can sleep.
We need to get your daughter to Murphy. She could be key.
We should sacrifice her. She's my daughter, and she's coming with me. You be strong, okay? We're not giving up.
No one is attacking us!
Our survival depends on her. Let's get to work.
So now it's sort of reminded me of Children of Men, of like, we've got this, valuable person that people, want. So where is this going? That seems like a lot of stuff woven in here, but somehow the trailer held it all together for me in this. And it's very much this genre that, like, late on a Friday evening or Saturday night, I look for these sort of like little sci-fi twist movies where it's not big effects, but it's an interesting concept that, maybe came out of some science fiction, pulp novel or short story of like, okay, let's see where this goes. What goes on with these characters? So that's what drew me to this trailer coming to Netflix on June 9th. It's got, there's some familiar faces in here. Barry Pepper, who somehow is, shows up every once in a while. I think the last thing I saw him.
Hey, he's on the Green Mile,
yes,
which we're talking about on the show
he was
this
in
week.
Green Mile, and he was in that alligator one. What was that one that just,
Crawl.
So
we did that in our Aquatic Killers series. Yeah.
So good to see him in here in this. It's all going in there. Jennifer Jason Leigh is in this. So I hadn't heard of this director, Mark Raso, I don't know. So I was like, who is this guy? And I thought, okay, what's he done? And he did a movie. This is, again, we're in this era of, movies sometimes show up, disappear. He directed a little film a few years ago called Kodachrome that has like Ed Harris and Jason Sudeikis and a story of a father and son on the road. I was like, I don't even remember hearing about this movie back in 2017. Oh, and also Elizabeth Olsen. But it's one of these films I thought, it's one of these like straight to video things, but I'm like, what a great cast. So clearly, after Kodachrome, this is his next project, able to, work on a project that had that cast to it. So that gives me hope for Awake that it's going to be a competently structured film, because that's always my fear with these sort of sci-fi things of, it's somebody's, it's a fun little project, but genre films sometimes become a little throwaway. So I'm hoping this to be better than Bird Box. What did you guys think of this trailer?
I love the look of it. There's something really interesting about the concept of the story. And I really did kind of go into the Children of Men vibe with it, especially when the girl says, I can sleep. And like that whole thing, I felt like it was pulling from that world. Maybe a little too much. It could work. I think the thing that I found really interesting about the concept is that it's not like people are awake and they're just awake. It's like you're awake, but you're going to lose your mind eventually society will just fall apart and everyone will die very quickly, I would think, because you're not going to be able to stand it. And you have that group of like a bunch of naked people standing out in the field. Like, I think there are setups in here for some really interesting ways to kind of deal with that. So I'm curious about it. And Shamir Anderson's in it, and we just talked about him on Stowaway on a film board episode a few weeks ago. So it's great seeing him in something else so soon. I'm curious. I'm very curious about this one.
I love Gina Rodriguez, so I'm happy that she gets to be a lead in a movie, especially like a big Netflix. This is like a top of the line thing now. But I'm super worried about this because it just seems like it's a tour of all the cliches of end of the world stuff. I mean, as they go through, it's just ticking them off. It's like, overzealous cops. There's the religious cult. So like, oh man, I hope there's something new and different in this, and it's not just playing the same notes over and over again. But it does have a nice stylish look to it. So I mean, like, I will give them that. Like, it does like Bird Box actually came. I was thinking the exact same thing when I saw him. Like, this is a little like in that is the same thing, but we'll see. I have high hopes, but I don't think it's not going to be top of my list until I hear different.
Well, June 9th, it'll be there in your Netflix queue, just waiting for you to watch it.
Speaking of Netflix, Kyle, what's your trailer?
Yeah, I had a hard time picking a trailer this week. I watched the trailers for a bunch of movies that I am never going to watch. So I tried to find something that I actually would. And then just before we sort of went on the air, I found Stranger Things Season 4.
Good morning, children.
Good morning, Papa.
How are you today?
Good, Papa.
Good. I'm glad to hear it, because today I have something very special planned for you.
11? Are you listening?
It's amazing. I'm a big Stranger Things fan, and I had almost forgotten it existed. And then I started watching the trailer. I'm like, oh, right, Stranger Things. That was the biggest thing on television for a while. And then I just hadn't, for all of everything that happened in the last 5 years, by which I mean last year, it's just completely flipped my mind that it even existed. And then I go, oh, right, that was a huge thing. So this is interesting because it looks like they're going back and telling some earlier stories. I thought they would be just going forward, but it seems like we're going to be having a lot more flashback because the trailer is just about 11's time in the, I don't even know what the name of it was anymore, but the institute, whatever it is that where they use to experiment on people. So yeah, it's interesting. Are you guys Stranger Things fans?
Yes, and it's funny that you say, so much has happened in the past 5 years, because it was 5 years ago this July that Stranger Things premiered on Netflix.
Oh, wow.
It was way back in 2016.
Oh, man. It's a different world.
Which seems, yes. Well, we've seen that cast grow up in all the other projects they've done since then.
Including Godzilla versus Kong.
Yeah, right.
Yes. And so I'm curious, when you're working with kids that are growing up and maturing, and then you're gonna say season 4, we're gonna go back in time. So how are you recasting those roles? Or again, is this just sort of a deception of, we're gonna have a story that's moving forward with those characters, but we're also gonna go back to maybe the history, and there'll be a connection to that, and it may not be revisiting those characters, but just again the institute. Although there is, 11 is present, in that little bit we get to see in the trailer. So I'm really curious if this is, we're going to see a projection, how they're going to manage that. But I'm all on board for anything Stranger Things. I will just, go for it.
I didn't watch season 3 for the longest time because I really didn't care for season 2. And then finally my daughter, who plowed through all of them twice, when she got to season 3 again, she's like, you just have to. And I'm like, all right, fine. And I loved it. Season 3 was great. So I'm very excited for season 4. My understanding is that while, this teaser really kind of plays up with a lot of the past. And I think these kids, we're seeing a lot of kids at the beginning who are so young that I'm assuming if they are showing 11, that it will be somebody else that they will have playing her. But I know that we're seeing Hopper in Russia, he's over there. So I know that we're going to see definitely some present stuff. So I'm really curious. And just the fact that, we have, so many people from the cast returning, and Robert Englund. It's just I'm very excited about where they're going with this. So, I'm all in.
It's this year. There wasn't a date at the end of the trailer. Have they actually said when it's coming out? I couldn't find anything.
No, I think it's all still TBD. Okay. Well, we are moving on, and now we are going to go through our list. Let's see how we did on this nightmare of a list. Thanks a lot, Pete, for his rage choice. He really apparently hates the it's not really the flashbacks. It's the bookends at the beginning and end of the Green Mile with the old man, and then he goes back, and the bulk of the movie is we're remembering when he was young, aka Tom Hanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have to do what we're calling misguided bookend flashbacks, which is a misguided title. It really is misguided bookends, I guess. Now,
yes.
I had a hell of a time with this list. I don't know how you two did. So mine aren't great. And I was referencing,
I'm worried that this is going to be a lot of steals because I don't think there's a lot of ones out there.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, and that was the challenge of it's how many movies are structured this way that it's the beginning and end take place at this point in time, and the middle stuff is a flashback. And then to say within that list of movies, which ones do a bad job of it?
Yeah.
Come on, Pete.
And then which ones are the other people in here going to pick? And so you want to pick them.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Very tricky list. And I was referencing the TV Tropes website a lot because they have all sorts of fantastic types of flashbacks that they were using, like the framing device, things like that how we got here. And so I was kind of using those as reference. And unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of the ones they were talking about. But I'm starting us off with one. And honestly, I hit a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to use some things where even if they started in one place, or like a how we got here beginning, where it starts one way and then it gets to that point, like almost at the end of the movie and you see it's that how we got here thing. I'm okay with just doing that. And so that's where I'm going to kick us off with Carlito's Way, which was Brian De Palma's film from 93, which is a fantastic film. I really loved it. It's about a convict who is trying to be clean, but everything is pressuring him to go back into the business and pull him back in, just like Pacino seems to always end up doing. Fantastic film. Al Pacino and Sean Penn were great in it, but the film starts off with him shot, and he's Penelope Ann Miller is crying and everything, and he's being wheeled on a stretcher through the hospital, and you hear his voiceover kicking in, kind of describing how awful it is and all this, and then you cut back to the beginning of how all of this happened in his life, and then you get all the way to that point at the end, and it's a very frustrating open because I feel like it takes so much punch out of the movie when it starts that way. And so I actually did an experiment with my wife. When I showed it to her, I actually started it after that whole thing and we watched the movie. And then I said, okay, now let's go back and watch the beginning of the movie. And she was just like, I can't believe that they did this. It was just ridiculous. And so, so that's my first pick, Carlito's Way.
Such a misguided bookend flashback ending. So I struggle with this as well. So I was trying to find sort of that bookend, and the first movie that came to mind. I would say this is, I think, one criticism of this movie of structuring it this way. Of starting with a moment, then going back, and then sort of getting to the foregone conclusion that we know we're going to get to. And I think oftentimes people will say, oh, when you set it up this way, it's because you know your plot is weak. And so you've got to create some artificial tension of like, well, how is it we're going to get to this point? So mine starts off with a confrontation between two men and one man getting shot by the other. And then we flash back 4 years earlier to see Humbert and Stanley Kubrick's Lolita going through his little depraved journey, which ends with him shooting Peter Sellers' character Claire Quilty at the end of Lolita. So we've got that murder at the beginning and end, and the flashback in the middle.
Right. I was tempted to put that one on there because I thought that was an interesting flashback, but I was also like, that was just on like a couple weeks ago. But honestly, on this list, it's like, who cares?
I didn't even exactly.
So my first one that came to me was a movie that had everything going for it. It had a great screenwriting team, great director, great stars, and a huge budget behind it, and yet it managed to fail at just about everything that it tried to do, and is now largely forgotten. From the far-off year of 2013, it's The Lone Ranger.
Oh,
because that movie actually has Johnny Depp as an old Tonto telling the story of the Lone Ranger to a kid who wanders into his museum zoo thing. I don't. Yeah, it's this is actually because there was an interview recently with Gore Verbinski asking him about that movie in particular, and so it brought it back up to mind. And that's all the thought you should have towards it, people. You really don't need to go back. It's fine. But now watching it, knowing Armie Hammer, knowing Johnny Depp, and also the whole cultural approbation thing, it was not good then, and it has not aged any better.
Yeah, there were a lot of odd choices when they went into production on that one. Let's just
the article I read was about, hey, were there ever werewolves in it? Because apparently that was the thing that was going around, because that's why he carried the silver bullets, was to shoot werewolves.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, and apparently there was a draft of it. Of the many drafts of that movie before it actually got to the screen, there was a werewolf draft.
And that's what happens when things go through so many drafts. They leave these little bits and pieces in the script, and then all of a sudden you have these things that make no sense. Yeah. All right. Next up for me, it's a very recent film. In fact, it just had an Oscar nomination this year. It was Andra Day who was playing Billie Holiday. It's the United States versus Billie Holiday. It's not a perfect example of this at all, but the flashback structure that we have here was just really annoying and very poorly written. It starts off with Billy going in to do like a radio interview, and it's the whole thing just kind of plays like, I don't know, it's very weird the way that it's just written poorly. This was not a great example overall of a biopic, and the fact that Lee Daniels chose to use this structure, well, it's technically the writer Susan Laurie Parks who wrote it this way, that had this structure where she's being interviewed by Reginald Lord Devine, and it came across in this really awkward way that just, I don't know, it just felt so unnecessary and just kind of lame. And so it was a very frustrating experience for me. And so that's my second pick, The United States versus Billie Holiday.
All right. So you guys remember way back in the 80s, the late 80s. Remember when like Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan were a thing? I don't know if you ever saw a little film called DOA, which was a remake of the 1949 film noir that starts with, I was murdered. I want to report a murder. Who was murdered? I was. It then begins the flashback into the life of Professor Dexter Cornell to tell the story that results in him being poisoned and ultimately his murder. And as he's trying to, of course, solve his murder and all of that. I remember, this is one of these things where seeing a film as a teenager and being like, wow, this is really clever. And then, seeing it later on and going, this is borrowing so many tropes. This has been done before. Not as clever. And please don't try to remake a classic noir film. So that's my second pick, the 1988 version of DOA.
I remember really liking that at the time, but I saw it when it came out. So back in the 80s. And was the original noir also called DOA?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I'll say I might have to. I didn't even know that it was a remake.
Does he super glue his hand to hers in the original? That's the one thing I really remember.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Kyle, next pick.
All right, so I'm also going back to the 80s for mine. So success is hard to find in Hollywood, and so when you finally get a hit, you definitely want to make a sequel. So you've got a fantastic young cast of these handsome actors. You got the people love it. So obviously the first thing you want to do when you make a sequel is slather as much latex onto your lead actor as possible and have him as his old self narrating the story. And of course, I'm talking about Young Guns 2.
Oh.
Because it has Emilio Estevez as old Billy, the not a kid anymore, telling the story of what happened in Young Guns 2. It's such a weird choice.
I don't remember that at all. I know I saw the movie because I was totally into the Young Guns movies.
Yeah, I don't remember that at all either.
Yeah, exactly. One of those things that you just think about them, Lou Diamond Phillips and him just riding the range. But no, there's a horribly made up Emilio Estevez, doing the...
Yeah. Oy.
Old man voice.
I remember, is that the one where Charlie Sheen's character dies? Or is that the first one? It was the second one, right?
I think he dies in the first one.
Well, just his death scene. It was pretty laughable. But, it's still, I still loved it. So what are you going to do? All right, for my final pick, I couldn't do a list about a movie that has a magical Negro in it without having one of my picks also be a movie with a magical Negro in it. It is, of course, Robert Redford's film from 2000, The Legend of Bagger Vance.
Bagger Vance,
and it's not a bad film. It's pretty slow, and I'm not a golfer, so I don't get into stories about golf that much. But I mean, the magical Negro thing certainly is an issue with this particular film. And the way the film begins is you have the old Matt Damon character played by Jack Lemmon. He's out having a heart attack playing golf, and he is talking to somebody. I can't remember, or maybe it's his voiceover. I can't remember, but and then he's kind of going through this whole thing, and then he remembers all of this stuff with his life, and then you flash back to him at the end, and it's him. He wakes up, and Bagger Vance is there, and he's as young as he was back when they were young together, and he beckons in. Of course, he follows because now he's dead, and that's the end of the film. And it's just,
Spoilers, Andy.
It's not that great of a movie. You're not missing out if you haven't seen it. And it's one of those movies. I was like, gosh, I don't know. I really don't care for it that much. And that whole framing structure is exactly what Pete was complaining about with The Green Mile. So there it is, The Legend of Bagger Vance.
All right. So my list was short. So this is a film that I saw, probably on network TV. I remember watching it with my dad, and it's, being at that age of maybe like 11 or 12 where you're just starting to like outgrow kids movies. And so here was something that was pretty long movie, a lot of history in it, but it was something about it that just was really compelling to me. But unfortunately, it picks this weird sort of framing structure, and I think some pretty bad old age makeup, given the time it was made back in 1970, maybe it's a little bit forgivable. But when you cast, a mid-30s something Dustin Hoffman to play a 121-year-old last sole survivor of the Battle of Little Bighorn in Little Big Man, it sets up like he's got an important story to tell, but I don't know that you needed that, whereas you could have just told the story and show him being the survivor through all the things he goes through. To have this interview set up, the movie could do without it, because all the fun stuff is really his whole story starting in 1859 when he and his sister, survives, an Indian attack and all the adventures that he has along the way. It's a movie that I just have this soft spot for in my heart. My wife cannot stand the movie. I don't know why, but it's one that, when I thought of odd sort of framing structures, this was one that came to mind. But it's, again, I don't think it's a bad movie, but I think poor use of the
actually,
device.
that's one where I think it's a good movie, and I didn't mind the device usage, but I can see people complaining about it.
Yeah, I had that on my list of bonus ones, too, because I was thinking, too, what is it about Westerns? That's 3 Westerns on this list.
Exactly. Yes.
Did you ever hear the story of Sir John Gielgud giving acting advice to Dustin Hoffman about Little Big Man?
Oh, yes, because it's where he... No. That I thought that was... Laurence Olivier.
Oh, was it Laurence Olivier?
On Marathon,
Marathon Man, where he's like screaming.
Oh, that was it.
And he's like, my dear boy, it's called acting.
Yeah. Yes. Have you tried acting?
Acting, yes.
All right, Kyle, final pick.
All right, so mine is a little bit different because this is actually a pretty good movie, and the frame sequence kind of works. But for me, the framing sequence is way more interesting than the actual movie, and so it imbalances it. So it's a horror comedy movie from 2009 called Jennifer's Body, written by Diablo Cody. This is interesting because it has Amanda Seyfried as the best friend of Megan Fox, Jennifer, telling the story in an insane asylum, and at the end you find out that she now also has powers and she's in an insane asylum. I'm like, well, that's the movie. Like, why aren't you telling that story? Like, they get to the end and the credits roll. And I'm like, no, you just got to the good stuff. So yeah, the movie's a decent movie, but like that seemed to me like they completely missed the forest for the trees there.
That's one I still want to check out. I'm curious about that one. So, but I haven't seen it. But now I'm going to have to.
Spoilers.
Well, I'll have to be thinking about that now when I watch it. So that's funny.
Yeah.
All right. Well, those are our picks. It was a rough one. All right. So next week we are closing our Stephen King a la Darabont series with their final collaborative work together. It is The Mist from 2007. It's a great horror film. I really enjoy it.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you two want to put on the list for next week?
The original short story of The Mist has a very different ending. So I think it'd be interesting to see adaptations where they change the end.
Okay, I love it.
And I see that we don't know who's doing the Sat Mat next week. If Pete's going to be on the Sat Mat, can we make that misguided use of changes to the ending?
I like your thinking.
Yeah. I say whenever Pete's on the list, we just add misguided into any of the picks. So
if the Handsome Man podcasting, Tommy's going to be on, then we need to have Swarms on there too.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Because he would love talking about that.
Absolutely. What do you think, Steve?
For some reason, I know I was drawn to, and I can't, the hiding out in a store. Because there's something about the dynamics that's one of the memorable pieces of this movie for me, is that dynamic of confined in a space and the challenges of storytelling and how well. So So, Pete, misguided uses of hiding out in a store. No, just hiding out in a store.
I think that's a great one because I already have my 3.
Wow, that's
like you said it, and I was like, "What movies are?" I got it.
Hiding out in a store.
I'm ready to go.
No, there's some good
definitely.
there. I think that
I have to put Lost in the Fog or Lost in the Mist. I think that's such a fantastic element that creates such an interesting visual in film.
Yes.
And I've seen it in a variety of types of films. Obviously it works well in horror, but I mean, it's all over the map as far as what you can do with it. So I think that will be an interesting one. So Lost in the Fog or the Mist. All right. So we'll put those up on the Show Talk channel over on Discord for everybody. You can go hop in and get your vote. If you want to get into the Show Talk channel, what you need to do is you need to become a member. You need to go to thenextreel.com/membership and become a supporter of the Next Reel family of podcasts. For just $1 a month, you can become a one-reeler, join our online community in our Discord server, and then for a few dollars more a month, you can become a two-reeler supporter and you can join us for live streams as we record, early access to shows in your very own feed. And you know what? We're doing a lot of member bonus episodes too. So you get all sorts of extra episodes that only members can hear. And of course, last but not least, Letterboxd. If you're a fan of Letterboxd, they have a discount now for anyone listening to The Next Reel. You just go to thenextreel.com/Letterboxd. You can upgrade your account to Pro or Patron with a 20% off discount. It also works for renewals. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Enough said.
Hondo.